Them up here.
Yeah, we'll get them up here. Let them get comfortable.
No, but you can go out of Harrisburg. What I do is have it's up, so we don't have a car stranded up there. Plus Harrisburg's horrible. Harrisburg's $20 a day to park. Oh, it's horrible. Matt, big time into that cattle. He's traveling all the time. 10, yeah, 2008. And the only reason I put up with him, I can't, he steals all my tools.
Okay, commissioners ready? You all ready? Commissioner Moore?
Yep.
Okay, welcome. We're reconvening into open session now. Just come out of closed session. It was a 3-2 vote to go into closed session. We had 3 ayes, and Commissioner Kiefer and myself, we opposed going into closed session. For me, everything we discussed in closed session, we could have easily discussed in open session. And I know this meeting was called earlier in the week by Commissioner Klein. I didn't know if he wanted to add anything before we move forward.
I didn't set a date for the meeting. And,
Well, you said it was your opinion to meet this week, so.
my opinion was that we meet.
Okay, I did just know if you wanted to add anything.
I'm going to agree with the attorney to go. I'm always going to yield to the attorney when we go to closed session. That's why he's the legal advice on that. But if you go into closed session and you want to participate actively and you vote no, I want to understand why you want to participate actively when you didn't want to participate.
I have every right to participate, so I didn't. I just didn't think it was a reason to go into closed session. But anyhow, with that, we would like to invite all of the JGBLI group up to the front row here.
Want to step back?
No. You're going to be talking? Yeah, there's 3. Yeah. Okay, just getting started. I know we have a proposal that we're discussing, and then the commissioner, we'd just like to know what your concerns are with the proposal.
Which proposal?
The one that was presented by staff. You received a proposal from staff
Yesterday.
Oh, so well, we had modified terms from the agreement of sale of real property. That was modified from the original one that we had sent over with Tayon. It didn't address a number of things that were submitted from the proposal on August 16th for the purchase from ESOC Holdings. Some of the things that we had issues with regarding the new terms included the fact that there are things regarding the utilities for the community center, the Maryland Historic Trust delineation line for the new deed, for the revised delineation marks for the Historic Site District, and also the cell tower, along with some of the other things that was asked of by ESOC Holdings from their original proposal that we sent. So those are the main issues that we wanted to discuss.
Okay, so the utilities for the center up there,
Yes.
and then the historical trust information, and then the cell tower.
Yes. Along with the additional terms that was requested on the proposal from ESOC.
And they are, and they are,
Um, we want to get a additional language stating once the renovation happens for the utility infrastructure, that there be language added to have it conveyed to the county, upon request. Also, disposition of existing personnel would still be at the county's responsibility. We ask that the county indemnify ESOC Holdings and JG Mills International for all unknown matters regarding the purchase of the property. And also the maintenance of obviously the special economic district and the task increment financing district.
okay, Rob, I'll turn this over to you. Have we addressed those concerns in the proposal?
Monroe, I think you're speaking to this, which was included in your Thursday communication. Starts with all meets and bounds must be established and clearly defined. Yes. So we have that. That's already been provided. The agreement has the buyer having the sole liability for utility infrastructure. We have addressed that under the standard county policy. Any developer that installs or improves infrastructure, once it's done in accordance with the county standards, then it is adopted. That's standard procedure.
So the terms that you sent yesterday said that we would be, so that ESOC, the buyer, would be liable in perpetuity. So that wasn't something that was new.
Maybe it would be best just to go through the agreement of real property.
So the one that was sent
This is the
yesterday?
basis, yeah, this is the basis of the agreement. So anything here, any language that you have here. This is almost exclusively the same with some strikes through. For instance, it starts with the first strike is eliminates Day Yun and provides ESOC Holdings as the buyer. So that's the first strike through.
I think he's looking at section H, where it talked about the successors and assigned was added, agrees to provide, and then a new addition was in perpetuity, the necessary connections to all utility infrastructure, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this provide in perpetuity necessary connections to the Fort Ritchie Community Center. The commissioners, the board is very cognizant of the fact that Fort Ritchie Community Center is a base for the community up there and doesn't want to take any risk that the community center would be at risk with utilities being provided. So H is specifically written to speak to that. And there does seem to be some confusion over the statement, which I'll just go ahead and read out here. I think it's worth the time, if you don't mind, President Baker.
Over here.
Fort Ritchie Community Center Corporation, its successors, or any subsequent occupant of the community center parcel operating a community center thereon shall be responsible for payment of any utility fees. In other words, the community center must pay the utility fees relating to community center parcel based upon reasonable fair market utility rates for the Cascade area and upon presentation of a proper invoice. So I don't know if you're aware or not, but certainly should be, that the utilities provided will be by the buyer here. So the electric lines, the water lines, the sewer lines, the, I believe it's propane lines, also all run across the property that is up for sale here.
No,
So just to be completely clear, as simple as possible, what this H is speaking to is you cannot take the community center off of those utilities. They must be provided at a fair market rate and be afforded an invoice to say, here's your monthly bill to pay that bill. That's all. That's all that says.
well, I think it actually is two separate issues. The first part is the maintenance of the utilities in perpetuity. So if the county were to, let's say we do the renovation and have all the utilities up to the state and county code, and it gets conveyed back to the county, why is the buyer still responsible for that?
Let's say that at some point that were to become part of the county sewer system or become part of the county water system, then I certainly see that would be agreeable to take in.
Right.
So
So
in
that's why the
perpetuity,
language is-
in perpetuity, or until such time that it becomes a public utility,
So can we change that language then?
or until such time it becomes a public utility, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's.
That would be
fine.
completely fine.
I think County Administrator Slocum, exactly. The only intent was, from the county's perspective, is we just want to make sure that those utilities, there's a connection to the community center. And that's what we're concerned about. So obviously, if the county takes it over, we're going to provide that connection. You know, if we can come up with some, I don't want to get bogged down in the language. I know in perpetuity is like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? But of course, you know, I said, and its successors and assigns. So the county would be, in theory, be the successor or the assign to that. So, so that, I mean, that was the point that we were trying to make.
Okay.
I mean, we as the county have to be sure that we always, that the community center has connections to
They have
whatever the
service.
utilities, no matter who it is.
That they have service.
So,
And they pay their bill.
Right.
and they will pay the bill.
All right,
I think
so
they've
as
already
long as
agreed
there's
to that.
clarification on that, then we're fine.
So,
And then the one other thing that was added last night was the relating, it says that reasonable for payment of any utility fee relating to the community center parcel based on reasonable fair market utility rates for Cascade area upon presentation of a prospective invoice. Well, I understand what you're doing. You don't want to charge $1,000 a gallon for service, you know, no big deal. But at the same time, when you look at utility rates in the Cascade area for water and sewer, there's only one, and that's the county. So you're basically saying it has to stay at the county rate. So, I mean, wording that says based on acceptable cost of service analysis for provision of service or something, but saying that it'll be the same county rate may not be accurate. It may be higher or lower depending on the development load up there. But at the same time, the developer has to be able to set the rate based on their cost of service for the customers. Not just because the county rate is that, because that's the only utility up there.
Yeah, I think it says based upon, so it doesn't say you have to meet that rate. It says
No, it's
based
just
upon.
Based upon.
Yeah, so I think the intent is to look out for the best interest of the community center to see that it's not and there's no, again, this speaks to successors and assigns, so that means that it could be a buyer or someone who comes in after ESOC. So there's no intent here to say, other than to say these need to be reasonable rates that they can afford and should anticipate affording in the future. That's the purpose of the statement.
And I think the reason it's a question is because this is just new language, so now's the first time we have a chance to ask a question about it. Because this was additional language from last night, so first time we have a chance to ask. And
yeah, I mean, we're just trying to clarify what our intent was. I mean, if there's additional language that at some point somebody wants to propose and we can look at.
I think, you know, it's obvious you don't want to charge $1,000 a gallon for this stuff, you know? You don't want them to
that's the
get
point.
stuck. You want them to have utilities and you want it to be a reasonable rate. And that reasonable rate would have to be based on the cost of service from the utility provider, just like with the county, same thing.
Would you care to go through, for efficiency, just go through the agreement of sale, anything you take? Because this will be the basis of of the execution that's proposed on September 6th.
Well, the only other piece that was kind of glaring for us was the Maryland Historic Trust piece on the conveyance of the deed of easement. So the previous version of the agreement that we had had said that the county would at least put its best efforts into finalizing that before settlement. Now the new language doesn't really address that. It's just, you know.
Well, and one of the things with that is that I know we felt, and I'm sure the county did too, that to say that you're gonna complete MHT before settlement, and settlement's supposed to be forthcoming pretty quickly, you know, you're not gonna push MHT to say they're gonna have it done on our schedule. So the intent, I think, when we discussed it, was that, you know, of course, the county has to go through and get the deed of easement signed, and MHT is sending that back, their picture exhibits, all that stuff that the county has to approve and send back. No big deal, but it shouldn't hold up settlement, and I don't think the county wanted it to, nor did JG. But with the change in the language here, it added that there's no legal obligation to do it. It didn't say that the county would then be responsible after settlement. It took that out and changed what the paragraph had originally said. Now it doesn't say that the county has responsibility to get it done at all. It just says that there's no legal obligation, and if it's done before settlement, fine, and if it's not,
What
it
happens?
doesn't really address it. So that substantially, materially changed what that paragraph had said previously.
County staff will be available to work with MHT to continue that endeavor. Greg, you know from probably working on this since taking over from Penmar, and even before Penmar that it was
It could
there.
take forever.
So we have indications that it could be within the next 30 to 60 days, but we didn't want it to be a basis of sale because that's a regulatory state agency that is beyond our control. So we didn't want to get to that point and have that be a matter of the agreement.
And I think that's agreed to. I think the only concern now is, without it saying that the county will continue to pursue that, if the county, after settlement, it says during settlement that you would accept the easement, but after settlement, if the county just says, you know, we're not gonna pursue it anymore, and then the new person would have to start over with MHD, then of course that could hold up the development, because until that boundary is reduced to the current proposed boundary, there's a lot of property up there that's intended to be developed that can't be, or raised, or whatever the case may be. So I think that was the concern, that it just, once settlement occurs, the intent on this side, I believe, was to ensure that it didn't hold up settlement, because it said that the county would have it signed before settlement, and I don't see as how that would have been possible. You know, might be, that'd be great, but MHD may not have that. But now, when it's changed like this, it says there's no legal responsibility, and it just cuts it off, and there's no responsibility.
Well,
I mean, our intent was exactly what you just said, so it sounds like we're on the same page. I mean,
Good.
the county's been moving forward with this ever since the county got the property to work on this, to get this done.
Yeah, even before.
And I said it last week, and I'll say it again, we're as close now as we've ever been. And so the hope is to get it done. Our concern was that, and theoretically, the county does not have a legal obligation to do it. I mean, there's already a covenant in place, but the county intends to do it, and I think it'll be in everyone's best interest to do that. If it's not done by settlement, we don't want it to hold up settlement. So that's why we changed the language. And the reality of it is, we can assist moving forward, but the county will not own the property anymore. So the county will not be able to give the easement. It will have to be ESOC Holdings or whoever the buyer is. So I think County Administrator Slocum said the county would be willing to assist, and hopefully, if we're one step away, it's just the change of the name. It's whoever the buyer is, but the county will not be able to give that.
And if that's clarified a little bit, I think that's the goal, because, you know, in here where it says, and again, new wording, first time we have a chance to ask the question about it. So when it says now, the county has no legal obligation, that immediately says, well, wait, it didn't say that before, so what are what are you getting at? We understand that you're not the property owner anymore, so you can't provide the easement. Right. But at the same time, you know, if the county just says, we're done with it, and it requires someone to start over, then that could be an issue.
Look, I think the county, whatever happens, I mean, the county wants this to be successful, so I think the county is willing to.
Yeah, we will certainly assist with the transfer to the new boundary rather than the old boundary, and assist JGBLI or whomever that is.
And
ESOP
that's well put.
Holdings.
What you just said is well put. Because, I mean, that prevents the county, not that this would ever happen, but I mean, to the extreme, what if after closing, you just said, oh, well, you know what, we decided we oppose that new boundary. Now you have no obligation, and now they have a problem. So what you just said is exactly perfect.
Okay, so we will add that language that makes that very clear.
Anything else?
And so one of the other things was regarding the cell tower and the fact that it was left off the deed. I believe it was one of the assets that was supposed to be transferred over to the buyer.
Cell tower is immediately adjacent to the Weinbrenner treatment plant. And that Weinbrenner treatment plant, that lot next to it, was stated, I believe, I haven't been through all the meets and bounds, it's several pages of meets and bounds information, but according to staff, that was included. Now, for a point of clarification, you're probably seeing it visually now where you didn't before, because I asked staff to provide a map so it would be entirely clear to address your first point here on meets and bounds. It would be entirely clear what the intention is to convey and not to convey.
And that did help, again, and I'll just hit the point that was on there. It did, in number 1, say meets and bounds, and then it specifically asked about the cell tower. And the reason that the counter proposal specifically asked about that was because, of course, that property transferred through COPT, Penmar County government, and when the original proposal was made to buy the property, it was anticipated that that's part of the property. Now, it's understandable that that wants to be cut out because it's adjacent to the treatment plant, and I believe you had said there might need to be treatment plant expansion. And that was also acceptable, but you can't expand onto the cell tower. And if that cell tower piece is cut out, you still have the remaining property over there. But the cell tower itself, when you look at the E in the agreement, it's still in the agreement, talks about telecommunications and all the components that'll be transferred to the buyer. And, you know, it talks about the lines, it talks about telecommunications, it talks about, you know, fiber optic components, and that is a telecommunications component. So it was anticipated that that tower itself, as part of the property that was transferred through the different transfers to different owners, would go with the property, because there is usefulness to that piece of infrastructure where most of the other infrastructure that's being transferred is all liability that has to be rebuilt. So it wasn't necessarily, understand that's over where the treatment plant is, but that piece of cell tower itself, you can't expand onto that. That's a cell tower. And the microwave capability that you can put on that tower, the transfer service providers, all that is certainly useful to that piece of property.
And I believe that's similar notion to what the county had in providing for county in the future, the ability to work with that cell tower owner on that property. So I'd like to think that there's some middle ground somewhere there between the two, that cell tower is not the basis of holding up the remainder. Of course, Weinbrenner is operating and has capacity now. I think there was other operational issues for that lot behind, in addition to any potential future expansion, you know, vehicles being located, et cetera. But the cell tower is probably something we'll have to discuss and see if we can find some middle ground on that.
Well, that was the point, that the cell tower itself is encumbering that lot. You can't do anything with where the cell tower sits, but the cell tower itself as a piece of telecommunications infrastructure is valuable for the property. And I mean, obviously that's why the county wanted to cut it out. But, you know, the county was, Penmar was transferred that property, the county was transferred that property, and when they said they were going to buy the property, obviously that piece is cut out, but that includes the cell tower, and that's why it was asked specifically about the cell tower. Yeah. So, I mean,
It's a natural question. I think
it costs money to build a cell tower, and if you want to do some microwave, you want to do security issues, you want to do, you know, service coverage, anything up there.
there may be something with co-location possibly, but just as JG and ESOC are looking out for Fort Ritchie, which you certainly would want to do, the county is looking out for Cascade community as a whole, and those telecommunications as well. So it's very much a similar interest in looking out for the appropriate parties. I'd like to think there's something we can do there's a lot of co-location agreements out there that have been done before, and I'd like to think that that would not be a basis of seeing this not happen is because of the cell tower.
No, it's not a point of major contention. That's the reason why I think we want the clarification.
Sure.
So
I
that,
appreciate that. Be
And
glad.
again, first time we have a chance to discuss that. So. And as you well know, the equipment shed itself, you know, is almost as valuable as a tower because of all the electronics that go in there and the things that you can do to make things happen with that kind of tower and equipment shelter. So, and it's at a cost. I mean, it costs money to build those. So.
So the next piece we want to discuss was the agreement as has the buyer having the sole liability for utility infrastructure and maintenance. We want to add language saying that the liability would revert to the county upon construction of the required county standard and upon request of the developer regarding the infrastructure. So we understand that we're responsible for the existing utilities and maintenance, but we are going over to GICC to be able to improve and get the investment necessary to be able to build out the infrastructure and the utilities for the whole site. And once that does get up to code, we just wanted to add the language that it's not just, you know, again, with that confusion of the in perpetuity, the fact that, you know, once it does come out to code, we do have the ability to be able to request of the county to be able to convey that.
Which, as you said, would have to be as per county policy.
I think from our perspective, I thought there was some language in there that said, because I mean, I think the county's intent is just like any other developer on any other piece of property, if there's infrastructure, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're exactly right, John. There is. On the bottom of page 3, the last sentence says, infrastructure may be conveyed by the buyer and accepted by the seller, being the county, in accordance with the generally applicable policies governing the county's acceptance of infrastructure. So I think that the spirit of that is well put, that we would certainly recognize, just like all building code, zoning, and so forth will apply to this property, so will any other development policies and procedures in Washington County, that if it's brought up to the standards, it would be accepted by the county.
And that would remain.
Yeah, that's in there.
So the next thing that, yeah, I see the language, so I think we're okay with that.
Okay.
The next piece of discussion is the buyer is asking for indemnification for at least unknown matters regarding the purchase of the property that would inhibit or otherwise restrict the purchase. So,
Just to elaborate on this before the attorneys get involved, because I know this has got to.
You know what I'm going to say.
This has
Go
got to
ahead.
be one. What they were talking about there, just for information, is that if, of course, there's a deposit in here of $600,000, and if through the fault of the buyer you don't close, or if the buyer doesn't close on time, the county can keep that $600,000. Well, if the buyer puts up $600,000, and in the interim, John Smith files a lawsuit and files an injunction against the transfer of the property for some reason, water rights, or you don't like, you know, the color of the grass, then the buyer's unable to close. So what indemnification is there that they don't lose the $600,000 if it's no fault of their own on the transfer of the property? That's kind of where that's why it said the purchase of the property, not the property, and not but the purchase itself.
just on the purchase.
And that's happened, you know, COPT, the lawsuits, and
think
you
it-
know, it's
mean, I
like
think-
if
I
you
think
bought a
if
new car and you went in and they said, well, we can't give you a clear title, but you got to take it anyway, even if we don't. That's kind of the scenario.
I think if there's some specific thing we want to address, I think we need to address it specifically. The word indemnification, as you know, I mean, the county is very limited as to what they can indemnify someone for. I mean, the county normally does not indemnify unless there's, some funding source or something like that can do that. This board cannot pledge its full faith and credit as an indemnification in some unknown issue. So, if we're talking about something in particular, we may be able to address that, but indemnification is something the county is not going to be able to do.
There is some valuable language already in the agreement. It's on page 5, it's number 8, and it does say damage to or taking of property prior to closing. And that does protect the buyer to the extent that's fair. It says in event of any catastrophic damage or loss to the property, and goes on to say the buyer shall have the right to terminate.
It now says catastrophic.
Yeah,
Before it just
we
said,
didn't want a broken window to say.
before it just said damage.
Yeah, we didn't want a broken window to say something or some other minor event. And I do believe that the county would be, we're in a formal meeting here on the record, I do believe the county, if something happened that wasn't considered catastrophic, we would seek to meet the buyer in the middle on making them whole for that. So, in other words, if the tractor that's listed in one of the exhibits didn't start any longer, I think we would certainly make it such that was a functioning piece of equipment.
Well, and
type of thing.
to be quite honest, that's not that big of an issue. So I think we really just kind of want to cover the broad issues in case, there's something that we should consider just in case during that period from the signing until the settlement that at least, from the buyer's perspective, would be able to cover it. I mean, there's nothing that we can do if it's nobody's fault, but, if there's certain things that we are able to do that makes it preventable, I think it would be agreeable to the buyer as well.
It really gets back to number 9, also, because it says under the buyer's default, if the buyer defaults in buyer's obligation to purchase the property, seller shall have the right at the seller's discretion to retain the deposit amount paid hereunder as liquidated damages, not as a penalty, which liquidated damages, but not as a penalty. Attorney had to put that in there, I'm sure. Not as a penalty.
No comment.
And upon such election, the parties shall be released from further liability, blah, blah, blah. So it says if they don't fulfill their obligation to close. Well, if someone files an injunction and, it says you can't use a property for anything in that interim period, and October 30 comes and goes and they haven't transferred $5.4 million because of that, then they lose their deposit.
I mean, and the next section talks about if the seller fails to perform its obligations,
Yep.
then the deposit will be returned.
Yes.
So if the county is unable to fulfill its obligations for whatever reason, I think the deposit would.
We understand. I think we were just, as Rob was stating, that there's probably some middle ground language that can work on both ends to be able to at least provide additional coverage just in case. So,
I think the county wanted to make the county's point as to all these issues. Here's the issue. The language, we can probably work out language, but
Right.
there are certain things the county cannot do, and then certain things the county has to protect itself against. So.
Yeah, we have, before we leave that, we have on page 5, it's 8A, B, and C for specific points. One is damage, one is taking, and the third is if the agreement is not terminated by the buyer pursuant to those provisions, which probably is what you already read, Greg.
Yep.
So there's half a page there that speaks to damage or taking of property prior to closing.
And from the seller, if you fail to perform your obligation under the agreement, but just because someone files a lawsuit doesn't mean that you can't transfer the deed. So you could still perform. The buyer could say, well, it's only September 30th and we already can't do anything with the property because it's tied up in a lawsuit, and they lose their $600,000 if they don't transfer the rest of the money. So that's what the intent was. So.
So, okay on that piece.
Anything else?
Oh, and so the one of the other pieces that we want to discuss was agreeing to maintain the status of the special economic district and the tax increment financing district as it is right now.
It's on
Which again, just like you don't want the community center to not to be without utilities or be gouged on how much they're charged. You know, the development itself, if you take away the special economic district, which is in, of course, the plan and zoned that way, and rezone it agriculture, then someone just bought a piece of property that they're not gonna get any return on because they can't develop it. And that's what that goes to. And of course, the TIF district that was created is an incentive for the developer, and they look at that when they actually purchase because he wants a return on his investment. So that's why that comment's in there.
In the TIF, we reviewed that because we wanted to specifically address that comment, like we did at all other comments, to make sure that this is solid for both the buyer and the seller. That TIF expires, or has the potential.
Sunset date of December 31st, 2022.
Yep,
2022, which can be extended, correct?
right, it can be extended.
So that, at this point, that's for three and a half years away.
And even with the TIF, obviously, someone has to bring a proposal in, you have to look at the proposal, you have to know what your reserve amount would be for the increment itself, and the county still has to approve it. It's not an automatic thing. So it's not like just because the TIF district's there, all of a sudden there's all this incentive. It has to come back and make good sense for the county and the developer and actually the company. So it doesn't give any rights to the developer because the district's there. It just gives them the right to bring a proposal in to, you know, if someone comes in and says, I'm gonna put, you know, $50 million and 2,000, or that's extreme, you know, 1,000 jobs somewhere, and the county thinks that's a really good deal and something they'd wanna see, then you might wanna give that incentive, just like you do with other companies. You know, it's just, and of course, that's not the first time TIF districts have been done, even, you know, with the one in Williamsport and everything else. It can make sense, and so it's good to have it, if it does.
Okay, anything else?
So the only other thing that we're, well, actually, didn't quite get an answer regarding it. Is that language that we can add, or
Regarding the TIF,
at least for the,
Special economic development.
yeah.
the Special Economic Development District is, yeah,
Well, the
licensed
foreign
by the
trade zone,
state.
It's a different one.
Yeah, that's for the
Yeah.
state.
Right now, it's zoned, when you look at the zoning ordinance, is it section 9, whatever section it is, it actually identifies Fort Ritchie property as a special economic development district, and it says, here's the allowable uses. If that went away, if you just decided to change the zoning and that went away, and now you made it ag, well, you might be able to build some houses and that's it. So that's why that special economic development district was always a material inducement for development of that, whether JLL was up there or Penmar or anyone. That was really one of the key things that allowed any of this development to move forward, unless it was just simple housing with other, you know, zoning categories. So that's why that's important to remain, because it allows a variety of uses like the 6 specific districts that are currently proposed. And it's in the zoning ordinance, it's part of the plan, it has been for, I don't know how long, before me.
Is that where the year comes in? You said 2022?
No, that's on something separate. That's
Yeah.
tax increment.
That's
financing
tax increment financing.
resolution.
Is there a concern that we might be able to help address that would be, I'm not familiar with any proposal or even thought to remove that. Has there been something?
No, I think it's just
it?
because it's one of the major key factors of what makes the property attractive. I think they're really just kind of looking for good faith language that, you know, this is something that, you know, we continue to be working with the county, you know, regarding this, and, you know,
There's no intent or
yeah, so
acceptable language, might say.
this is something that it will continue to assist or support on, you know, after settlement. You know.
That's been there, oh man, I don't even know how long ago that was created, but it was a substantial amount of time ago.
Right. It's been in place for a long time. And
Yeah,
it-
that's
I
why
just- I know there's
COPT
been no-
wanted
there's
it,
been
that's
no
why
discussion.
Penmar tried to market it through JLL, that's because that district allows those uses. That's the whole key. So if that changed, it wouldn't be worth anything.
Necessary.
Change if requested by developer.
And aside from that, we're just asking for any additional agreements, leases, contracts, any other information that we could have turned over by signing. So,
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's actually highlighted on my paper of your request. What we're working on getting you this week is a formal letter that says you're welcome to come into what's of the castle with all the documents. See that there's a number of documents that we won't be able to move around to provide to you, but you are welcome to have full access of that. Any documents that we have here electronically that you've requested will be either put on thumb drive or thumb drives and be provided to you this week. Okay. We will have those this week, if at the very latest 7 days from now. We want you to have those well in advance of the signing of the agreement.
And in fairness to the county, I'm sure you wouldn't want to, some of those documents are almost irreplaceable. You know, some of the things that show utility locations, different things. You wouldn't want them to give someone, it never closes, and then you don't get them back, then you just would lose them. And they're not replaceable, so that's very reasonable. And they can have full access then when closing occurs. Yep, leave them right where they are.
There was one point out, I don't know if you had any further, but there was one point that spoke to in the communication recently, last night, regarding time. And the time has been provided here to what you provided Thursday evening in your communication has been inserted into this document. So any exception to the time would be, it's been entirely consistent with what's been provided to the county.
I think we're okay with it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the only concern about that was, again, and not for excuses, but it's the first time we really got to ask questions about the new document. And if there turned out that there was substantially new terms, that might impact the time frame. But, you know, in absence of that, which it seems there is an absence of that, you know, that time frame is exactly what's proposed and agreed to.
Okay, anything else? Okay, commissioners, questions, comments?
Just one question. I don't certainly want to complicate anything at this point. I think we've had a good meeting here today, and I think we can, next couple of days, clarify a few things and detail them out, and everybody should be acceptable and happy. The one thing that I haven't heard, and I know for many years it was a real discussion item, I guess is the best way to put it, is the museum
Yes.
on the facility. It was in, it was out, it was a wish, a dream. Does any discussion or anything regarding the semblance of a museum play into this between buyer and seller and Penmar and, you know, all that?
Certainly not spoken to here.
Right.
So
I didn't know.
Oh, so it was actually part of our development plan.
Okay.
And we were going to convert the castle into the museum along with the library and one of the administration buildings that sit adjacent to it. So we had been in discussion with a few architects, internal discussions on how to be able to curate some of the items, what would be part of that. And so that's been part of our development plan. I do believe that we've been discussing a little bit with the community center regarding that as well. So,
Community center actually has some items.
Yes.
That were turned over, and of course Joe's on the board of the community center too. And, you know, even when you talk about the money at Fort Ritchie that Penmar had turned over, you know, obviously the community center is gonna be a good benefactor of that. But, you know, there are several groups up there, including the community center, that, as you said, are very interested in a museum and something in the castle and surrounding buildings that really represent the history of Fort Ritchie. And might be a good use for some of that to also help jumpstart that type of initiative. And that's kind of what, was hoped would happen at some point with the museum.
I know that's very important to the community up there.
Yes.
Very.
Whether it's in addition to the, my personal druthers would be, it would be attached to the community center in some fashion so that it's forever visible and part of, as you go in and out of the facility. But I'm glad to hear that that is on your radar also.
The castle's so iconic that converting it into a museum just made a lot of sense for us, so.
Understood.
And to wrap further arms of security around that, it is in both the existing and proposed historic district, so.
Right, that was one of the key things. That's a good point. Yep.
Taking Commissioner Barr's comments there, which I think were great, looking into the future. Something that hasn't been talked about, was just mentioned just very briefly, the fire station. I know as plans unfold, there's the potential for hundreds, thousands of new residents in that area. I've been in conversations with some folks from the Smithsburg Fire Department, who I think that's one of their response areas, along with others. Any idea, is it too early to say? I mean, we have a fire station up there that's in relatively good shape. Using that as a fire EMS station.
It's a possibility. It's also a possibility that we could build a new facility. So it's one of the things that as we're planning out the whole scope of the community, that that is something that's very important to us as well.
And again, you make a good point, because one of the things that has occurred is with the Smithsburg Fire Company and the EMS company, of course, there's potential, if a development occurs down there, that they may have a new site that they're locating a new facility on, and there may be some contribution to additional response units. But the conversation has been that on site there would be specific space dedicated for EMS, fire, and even police substation.
Yeah, that was one of the concerns that I've heard, police protection and coverage.
And have actually told them that, once all this is finished, that would like to set up a meeting with the individual entities and determine exactly what their needs would be and how that would move forward.
Okay, anything else, commissioners? Anything else to add? Thank you. It was a very productive meeting, and
President Baker, if I could, not to interrupt you, but I want to see that this moves forward progressively and be diligent with what we've discussed. So what I have for us to resolve, and if I may recommend that we try to do this so that it's before you, anything that's changed is before you next week, that we are going to speak to the cell tower. If there is any negotiating room on that, we'll certainly consider it, even if it's co-location, what have you. The next item I have is that Ad County will assist and perhaps support whatever the proper legal language is for the MHT. I have that, or until such time a public utility is provided, which I think is consistent with what it already says, but just to be absolutely certain in the buyer's mind. Those are the things that I have that I think we can get done early this week and get resolved. So,
anything else to add?
So if we can, just the additional protections regarding the sale, the purchase of the property, and also if there's any sort of good faith language that could be done regarding the existing special economic district and the TIF. So.
And you said we could use indemnification? Is that what?
No. Just so we're clear, no.
Yeah, just so we're clear.
I mean, as to the TIF, I mean, obviously there's a resolution in place right now. There's a 2022. It'll be could be most of these guys. It could be a different board by then.
Right.
So it's difficult for the county to commit to beyond that. So I'm not sure what you're going to be comfortable with, but I'm not sure how much the county can commit to. You may have a different board. I mean, obviously, any change in that, even the special economic district you're talking about, when it's a zoning ordinance, you know, the county would, there would be a process the county would have to go through to make that change. And obviously, that would be a public process that anybody would be involved in. To commit to, you know, to commit to not making those changes. For this board to commit to that, I'm not sure they can technically do that. So I just want to throw that out to you to think about. It's not that the county has any intention to do anything different than that, but, you know, that would be committing a future board to.
And that might be it, intent.
And again, I think it's okay to say, I mean, the county obviously wants this to be successful.
Yeah.
So that's,
And that's all we've wanted from day one.
right, that's what this board has wanted. I think that's what.
Yeah, the TIF is fully in place, and I think it's supported by all the commissioners here. I can't speak for them. All the commissioners here, and there's no intent, nor has there been any remark to remove it or reconsider it whatsoever. So, okay, so I have add protection of sale. We will certainly look at item 8 to see if there might be something that we can adjust there. The TIF and the special economic district. Those, okay.
Okay. Ladies, compare notes.
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, commissioners? Staff?
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor for adjournment, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week is due to be.
Sure.